and Science of Leadership podcast, where Dr. Carly Hunt and I get to talk about things that are very important to us. And we think that a lot of people enjoy hearing us talk about the componentry of leadership. And just as a way to preface the conversation, there's really four areas that we lean on in terms of like a learning pillar, if you will, that informs a lot of the discussions that Dr. Hunt and I have. The first, obviously, as a tip of the cap to her expertise, is the neuroscience and the psychology of performance, of leadership, positive psychology. Then there's the social and behavioral science, the organizational development science, if you will, that comes from our work in consulting with organizations. Then there's the timeless wisdom traditions that are thousands of years in the making that just continue to ring true when it comes to the human experience. And then the last is empirical data, or coupled with anecdotal data, if you will, from the experiences that Dr. Hunt and I have, not only as college athletes, but as professional service providers, working and running organizations over the last 30 years. That's for me. Dr. Hunt, much younger than me. But in any event, we like to have fun with this. We hope to create value for anybody that is tuning into our conversation. We think we have a lot to offer in terms of some critical thinking and some good ideas. So with that, Dr. Hunt, good to see you again. This is our third episode together. It's becoming a bit of a trend.
Yes, it's lovely to be here, Chris, as always. So looking
Great.
forward to this.
Yeah. So one of the things that you and I have been talking a little bit off camera has been this idea of competing. And I don't think this is just influenced by the fact that the Super Bowl was this weekend and spring sports are starting and winter sports are still going on and at every level. But this idea of, are you ready to compete? And in terms of leadership, we both know that CEOs, executives, executive directors, every day sort of feels like game day because you've got to be on, and every day sort of has that challenge and ring to it. But in terms of the requirement to compete, the way I frame this out, it feels like there's three sections of game day. There's preparation for game day. There's the game itself when you're in the moment, and then there's the film study, if you will, where you get to reflect. But all three of those requires art and science in terms of how we can understand our mindsets, our mentality, our emotion, our psychology, but also what are some of the tools and learning that we can pull through into any given game. So, Carly, let's start. Let's start with the prep part, getting ready for game day. From your expertise and your perspective in working with leaders and athletes, what are some of the key components that you like to discuss and work through as it relates to the preparation for competition or the preparation for game day?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm happy to talk about some of that. I think that this is just so important in terms of developing intentional kind of pre-game or pre-competition routines that support readiness and mental well-being. And there are kind of some common elements that often show up in those effective routines that I work with people on. For example, certainly even each day coming back to what are the goals, right? What am I getting to today? And I often frame those as process goals, which are what are the processes that we're doing to kind of get us to our vision, which is kind of more of an outcome that's not like immediately within our grasp, so to speak, to kind of really set that intention for the day, right? How do I want to show up today? What type of leader do I want to be? What are my values? Even just for a moment to kind of even over a cup of coffee it doesn't take long, right? Even a minute or two to say like, okay, where am I going today? And let that kind of be the guide. And I think even thinking a little bit about, what challenges do I anticipate today and how am I going to deal with those, right? Almost kind of thinking ahead and planning sort of strategically, which is something you and I have talked a bit about. And then there's some certain mental skills that I help people develop if they're having certain, if they're noticing certain mental habits kind of impede their performance. So, for example, a big one is just how we react to negative events, right? So oftentimes,
Mm,
a challenge happens. It's so easy to go to, oh, well, we're headed towards failure, right? Versus more of a, what's often in psychology is called positive reappraisal, where we reappraise the thing that's happened in a way that's more helpful, right? And
mm,
so sort of thinking through how to have skills like that. Um, and arousal regulation. So if anxiety is showing up often, that can really kind of get in the way of self-actualization, as leaders, as performers. And so maybe the routine involves some breathing or a brief, walk, or it can be kind of person specific, but I think it's all about ways to get into that optimal mindset that's balanced, that's focused on what's most important. But I'm curious what you
love
think
that.
about that in terms of your
Yeah,
expertise.
I'm so pleased that you took us there. It's the routines piece of this, the things, the affirmation, the the
Mhm.
fact that I as a leader am going to be reflective at the outset to say what is required of me, how am I going to show up, what are my skills, what's going to be called on for me today. That is so
Mhm.
foundational, and so I'm so pleased to hear that from the neuroscience and the psychology community, that is affirmed in some of the practices that we work with leaders on in terms of creating those, even just say the morning routine of being able to get
Mhm.
into that mindset, preparing to show up in a way that calls on all of your skill and ability as a leader. That routine element
Mhm.
is foundational. And then when I was listening to you, Carly, I was thinking about the idea of visualization, the idea of
Mhm.
seeing myself in that meeting, at that retreat, at that workshop, giving that strategy meeting, that input, visualizing myself creating value, and
Mhm.
making sure that the leaders take on that same sort of visualization. I know that you would say it much more artfully than I do, but visualization is part of the rubric that comes to mind, or the thinking that comes to mind, in terms of getting game ready, getting ready to compete. Um, but I
Mhm.
love some of the tools that you referenced too. They're very accessible. And one of the tools that we have seen use is just a little moment of reflection immediately before you compete or before the game day. And what is that mantra that you're leaning on? For me,
Mhm.
oftentimes before a very relevant interaction or engagement or meeting or event, I'm saying, I want to create as much value for this person or this group as I possibly can. And that's my
Mhm.
mantra to get
Mhm.
me ready to
Mhm.
compete. But is am I using the visualization concept appropriately there, do you think?
Definitely, yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that is fundamental, right? And it kind of goes along with goals and intentions, right? Like,
Mm,
where am I going? And now let me visualize success doing that. Let me visualize engagement because then we just prime our entire system to go in that more positive, confident direction versus kind of imagined failures or just not having a clear vision. So, and there's been really neat research done in the athletic space around visualization, brain looking at athletes brains when they visualize successful performance. We see parts of the brain that are attributed to motor skills and motor performance are activated, right, even just from thinking about doing a motor skill
mhm.
successfully. And so I think we know that it affects our physiology in these important ways. And so I think even setting aside a few moments to visualize that success, visualize oneself overcoming obstacles, is going to really fuel that confidence, which we've talked about, which is so
Yeah.
just so helpful in terms of leadership. And I think it's also something, from a motivational standpoint, because it can be challenging to commit to a daily routine, right, and sort of bring oneself back versus kind of getting into the frenzy of busyness or
Mm,
kind of whatever, like a more reactive place, right? And so
right.
I think in psychology, the concept of modeling, I think, is so important for leaders. So yes, we want to help people that we work with do their own mental skills training so they too can benefit from these things. But also, people look to the sturdy leader
Mm.
to basically get information about how they should be feeling and where are we going. And so, when people commit to that mental training themselves, it really does rub off almost energetically around, to those around a person. And so I think that can be really, sometimes motivating to say, like, okay, like, how do I want to influence other people today, just in the way that I am with others?
No question. I love that. The energy piece. We're walking batteries when it comes to this,
Yeah.
and we can create that positive relational energy. It's important to be mindful of how that affects others. How is that incentivizing? How is that motivating?
Mm-hmm.
So that when we actually do get to game day itself, are we in more of that place of equanimity, right? This is where I love to go in
Mm-hmm.
terms of that calm and composed mind in the midst of challenge. How are you showing
Mm-hmm.
up in competition? Are you able to regulate emotion? Are you able to be aware, self and others? Are you able to respond and use your reasoned choice to stay in the game rather than be thrown off by events that are out of your control? Those are the things that I think about in terms of in game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Competing. Help me out. Help me out a little bit, Dr. Hunt here. What are some of the things that you think about in terms of the psychology of the game day itself?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think you named a lot of it there when I think about being able to respond
Mm,
rather than react, right, to
mm,
events. And so I think for high performers, it's a constant point of focus is refocusing on the process and the controllables, right?
mm,
So ruminating about the past and everything that went wrong is going to, wreck the future, right? And similarly, jumping into the future towards imagined catastrophes or
mm,
things that could go wrong or what have you is also just going to sap your energy. And so,
mm.
what is this next step that's right in front of me? And can I give this 100%? Right. And so I think that's so key for the equanimity piece that you mentioned. And I think that having a suite of tools to handle emotions effectively, right? Because and that's something that is kind of a that we're always learning, right?
Mhm.
So if I have an emotion that feels like it's going to derail me, how can I how can I work with this and still act in line with my values and where I'm going? And so that can look like a lot of
I
different
love
things for a
that.
lot of different people.
I
But I
think
think
that is
having some
spot
reflective, yeah.
on, Carly. And I heard it said this. I heard it said this way today, which I think you'll appreciate. One of my clients was using this example from his athletic past. He said that he was on a basketball team that was very good, but they were always found themselves being down going into fourth quarter. And so his coach
Mm-hmm.
would always say, "There's no 20-point baskets." So just focus on the next 2 points. Like get your head
Mm-hmm.
back into what that next right move, what is a phrase that I might say, but what is that next,
Mm-hmm.
like committing to playing defense the way we do, committing to getting the rebound, committing to make the outlet pass, committing to run the offense. It's a 2 point basket, and then we'll do it again, right? Don't
Mm-hmm.
be in the game. Don't be overwhelmed by the fact that you've got this deficit. There's no 20-point basket, right? So focus on some of
Mm-hmm.
that micro decision,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
it
And I
really
think
landed with me. It just so happens the timeliness was good.
yes, absolutely. No, I love that. And it kind of brings me to this idea of, in a certain sense, redefining what success is. So
Mm,
if for myself today, can I define success by how well did I commit? I love how you use the word commitment to each step in this process, be that in basketball or a project at work. And if I really gave my full commitment and focus and attention in all those micro moments throughout the day, when the
mm,
day is over, I can say, wow, I really gave my full wise effort on what was on within my control. And I think that can really, in and of itself, is such a powerful tool for emotion management, because we suddenly feel like we have so much more power and agency, because yes, we can
mm,
impact this thing that's right in front of us, right? And that in
right.
itself is can help us feel kind of more calm and composed and in control.
Yeah. Well said. So let's go to the final chapter here of competing, of game day. It's the reflection part, which we tend to forget about in terms of the leadership and performance dynamic, which is that's just as important as step one and step two. Step three is
Mhm,
okay, so what did we learn? Right. And
mhm,
I've learned a lot from you about neuroplasticity and our ability to rewire the neural pathways and develop better habits. I've that's really stuck with me. And in reflection, that's critical. It's not certainly we have to correct mistakes, we have to be accountable, we have to own things. But at the end of the day, the film study after the game is about learning and then building on the better habits, the better approaches. And you've really helped me in that regard, thinking through that.
yeah, absolutely. I think I like how you brought us back to the concept of neuroplasticity because, and again, just to mention a couple things about that, we've learned in recent decades that the brain can always adapt to experience. And so I think that tells us that no matter what experience we've had, be it a, success or failure, it's always providing us with information that we can use to improve, right? And so that interpretation of events is so much more effective than doing things that I find can be roadblocks for elite performance for
Mm,
performers, such as I screwed up, like what was I thinking, like
mm,
that negative dialogue, or even kind of not taking the time to really reflect on ways in which we could do things differently, right? So we really want to create space and time, like you said, give time for this without kind of tumbling forward to the next thing about starting with what went well, right? Like, what am I proud of? What are my strengths?
mhm.
Again, from a neuroplasticity perspective, continue to give your brain that information that, yes, you are strong, you are capable, you can do this, right? To kind of combat that sense of confidence that feels so shaky, right?
Yeah.
Savoring what went well. And I think that's so important because our brains, coming back to neuroscience again, they're more apt to kind of fixate on things that are threatening or that didn't go well
Mm,
versus all the information that's in the universe that we have tools, we are
mm,
capable, the world is a safe place, all
mm,
that stuff, right? So I
yeah.
think pausing on that and then also getting into the growth areas, right?
Mm,
What do we want to improve? What are we taking from this? How are we going to integrate that into our plans, right? For where we're going,
right.
our processes. And I think also just being really, really actively seeking feedback from as
Yeah.
many different supporters as possible and being
Great
really, really
point.
grateful for whatever folks have to say, right? Because that's really a sign of a good leader is to be able to
Mm,
take feedback well
yeah.
and not take it personally, but be like, oh, how amazing is this that this person is willing to tell me this piece of constructive feedback that I can then use.
100%. Yeah, and that's the choice. I can choose to see it that way. It's up to me,
Right.
right?
Yes.
That's completely
Yes.
up to me.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is a huge accessibility point that I wish more people would avail themselves of. That
Yeah.
choice and how you're perceiving
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, well,
Mm-hmm.
once again, the time flies by when we get to talk about the things that you and I are both passionate about, and there's so many organizations that are ripe for continued learning in this area. How we can continue to take the art and science of leadership and bring them together for better performance, for better outcomes, for a better culture. I'll leave you with this, Dr. Hunt. One of the first interviews that Mahomes did after they won the Super Bowl on Sunday, he was asked, did he ever think at 28 he would have three Super Bowls? And he immediately credited the culture of the organization, of what Andy Reid had built at Kansas City, for allowing him to have some autonomy, some agency, some input and influence, and he attributed it all to culture. And no surprise to you and me, I think it's just important for all of our leaders and organizations to be even more mindful of that. So, Carly, thanks again. Let's
Love
do
it.
this again next month. What do you think?
Sounds great.
All
I love
right.
it. Take care, Chris.